Thank you. Little known fact, Kara, back in the day of that first term, they had it all screwed up. First place got the president's vote, second place got the vice president. And that's how you got screwed up, right? Not you. That's how the country, and that's what Jefferson did to undermine Adams. And then they decided that wasn't such a good idea. We might need to start not letting the guy that comes in second be on the same deal. Anyway, well, because it would be quicker. We have Justin Brown with us today, and I'll go through a couple of things. He's the past Secretary of Human Services for the state of Oklahoma. He stepped down July 12th, so thankfully we don't have a guy that came today and quits tomorrow like has been going on. So anyway, in a stroke of bad luck, he took over the agency in March of 2020. And we all know what that was that we've tried to put out of our mind. But I came across an article he wrote on October 2nd in the Daily Oklahoman. And he talked about an implemented strategy that he had done at the DHS of the True North. And he's going to talk to us about that. It's kind of interesting. He's a high school graduate of McGinnis, an OSU graduate of '01, if you can't tell by his shoes. And to be here, he flew in this morning at 1 a.m., took his son to two-a-days at 6 this morning. So I really appreciate him making this effort to do something that he could have easily backed out on. So Justin, come on up. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, appreciate it. All right, good. I have a mic. Thank you very much. So it's great to be here. I did fly in a little early, so you may have to give me some grace. I don't know whether my words will come out like they normally do. I loaded up on coffee on the way here, but any opportunity to be in Stillwater in God's country where I can come back and drive. And my job when I graduated, I worked at Hastings right next door. I was the manager at Hastings, and so anyways, lots of incredible memories. My wife and I dated all through college at Oklahoma State, and we come up very regularly for games, so I may see some of y'all running around at Boone Pickens Stadium or something this year as we're playing Arizona State next year or whatever, right? So I only have about 20 minutes to sort of share a full-scale framework on eliminating poverty. So it's kind of a complicated conversation topic. So I'm going to try to run through quickly. Just know it is very complex. One of the sort of fundamental philosophies is nobody has ever done this well, right? So we're going to get things wrong. I need a lot of grace. Anybody working in this space needs grace. But what we need is motivation and support to really do what I think is the most important thing in our country, in our community. So Chris mentioned the concept of True North, so I'll just mention that briefly, but I'm going to go deeper into a couple of the True North elements. I started actually at DHS as director in June of 2019, and then was duly appointed as cabinet secretary, so I held two positions for 3.5 years. So in March of 2020, I was appointed as Secretary of Human Services on the governor's cabinet. It's been an incredible honor. I came from the private sector, so no government experience at all. I can talk about that. And by the way, I can talk about anything y'all want to talk about. You may be interested in, I'm not a government employee anymore, so maybe I have all of the dirt that everybody wants to know. And but I obviously experienced a lot. DHS is the largest agency in the state, 6,000 employees. At the time, 92 offices, about a $3 billion budget. Operating the most critical systems in our communities, right? The child welfare system, very difficult. Every day I received the email of child death and near deaths, sometimes with pictures. It's an incredible burden to bear, not just as a leader, but also as a sort of frontline employee who deals with incredibly traumatic situations every single day. So child welfare system is the biggest part of the agency, but less than half of the agency. The second largest is the social safety net programs. So what people referred to back in the day as the welfare system that does not exist anymore in 1996 with welfare reform. Real cash welfare went away. There is really no such thing as cash welfare any longer. So I always like to say that because when we talk about safety net programs, I talk about things like SNAP benefits, food benefits, housing, health care, of course, energy assistance, child care subsidy, which is an economic development program. So those are the things I refer to when I talk about safety net systems. So when I came in June of 2019, I created a process called Finding Our True North. The idea was to elevate the voice of the workforce, to create a brand new vision, a strategic plan for the agency. So we created 3 to 5 guiding principles for each division, and I just named a couple of those, child welfare being one. And then we created 9 guiding principles for the entire agency. A couple of them connect to what I want to share with you today, so I just wanted to bring that to you as a little bit foundational. Number 2 of the agency-wide True North is to remove systemic barriers that keep our customers from accessing resources. So you all probably know all about these barriers. These are transportation barriers. It's difficult. Government makes you go from building to building to building and take off work and figure out what to do with your kids while you're trying to navigate the complexities of a very difficult system. And then number 8 is to move upstream to meet families before they become in crisis. The human services system as a whole is a very defensive, reactionary system. We come into play when something happens or when you fall to this level of despair to reach out for help. That's not the right approach. The right approach is to take our resources and invest them differently and try to move forward upstream to meet families in a prevention space so they never become in crisis. So that was True North number 8 for the agency. Number 9 was new, and it was to build a world-class customer experience, illustrating the value that we place in the people that we serve and the workforce that's so important in serving them. So those are sort of anchoring principles that I wanted to bring to this conversation on poverty. So Chris mentioned, I'm going to hit a couple of notes to make sure I get them right. Chris mentioned a series of articles that are editorial articles that I wrote for the Oklahoman, all around taking a sort of fresh look at poverty. And I want to hit a couple of those articles because they're relevant points for this dialogue. But then I'm going to go much deeper into one of those articles. So in the first article, I talked about narratives that occur in our communities. And narratives are so hard to break. So I'm not asking to break narratives. I'm asking to pause a few narratives for just a minute while we have these conversations. One of those narratives is a political narrative. And that is a narrative that there's 50% of our community that are aligned politically that only see government as the only solution to the problem. So let's just pause that one. I definitely have been in the room with so many of my friends and peers in the legislature here locally and nationally on that side of the aisle that see the solution being work and education and community partnerships and faith-based organizations as being components of a solution. So I just want to pause that one. And the other one is the other side of the aisle doesn't care anything about people, and that's wrong too. I've also been in the room with lots of people on that side of the aisle who are super compassionate, and they bring that care for their neighbors to their work in the legislature. So I just asked for a pause on that one. And then the other pause narrative is the most important one for me, is that the people who live at or below the poverty level, and in our state there are 600,000 Oklahomans who live at or below the poverty level. To put that in perspective, the poverty line in the country is $26,500 a year for a family of 4. That isn't very much, right? So the people who are living at or below the poverty level or who are experiencing homelessness, that they just want to be that way, that they don't have the desire to lift their families out of that situation. And I would love a pause to that narrative. I hear that one frequently as well. While you may run into someone who uses those words and also does not act in a way that sort of makes it feel like they want to exit poverty, the vast majority of those 600,000 Oklahomans are working. They're trying. The SNAP program has a work requirement in Oklahoma, so people who are receiving SNAP benefits are working. And so if they're able-bodied without dependents, so the ones that you would think of as sort of taking advantage of the system. So that's the other narrative. I just wanted to pause for just a minute while we have the conversation. I'm happy to address those deeper, by the way. Pausing doesn't mean we don't talk about them. It just means let's be open to the rest of the conversation. Oh great, I lost my little thing there. So that was submission number 1 in that series, and I don't know why. And then in submission number 4, I created a series of anchoring values. The first is that people are fundamentally good, that they are born. We said a prayer before the session, so I feel like I can talk a little bit more about some of that concept. But they are created by a higher power, and human beings are fundamentally good. Something occurs, of course, over time that gets in the way of the behavior that makes us think that they're good, but let's start with that fundamental understanding that people are good. The second is that government is broken, and we can talk about that a lot. There are great people in government, but the system has been built over the years, never thought about how it would work together. A new program comes in, and it does not consider all of the other programs that are there that should be complementing. They actually conflict, and those conflicts bring barriers. And so the people in government are incredible heroes. That was an epiphany of mine. When I started at DHS, I was expecting, I came from the business community. I was expecting to see the freeloaders and all that. That does not exist. There are incredible people in government, but the system is broken, not intentionally, but it needs to be corrected. So that's the second fundamental philosophy. So ultimately, when I say that, it's to say that blame for people who have not been successful can fall on multiple shoulders. People need to take their own motivations to move forward for their families, but it is also really hard to navigate these systems. So that's some grace that we need to give people. The third is that we can simultaneously hold two values. One is that we can do the right thing for people, we can do good, and we can do the right thing for taxpayers at the same time. Those are simultaneous, or values that we can hold to get simultaneously. We don't have to sacrifice one for the other every time. Again, all of these, I have 20 minutes, so I know all of these this could be an hour on each of these bullet points, but I'm running through it. So keep track if you want to ask some questions. Let's see. So the next is, and I've sort of alluded to it, that government isn't the only solution. It is a critical component to the system, but is not the only solution. It's up to our communities, our local communities, to stand up, the business community, the nonprofit and faith-based communities to stand up and serve alongside government in the right spaces. And sort of to that end also, that I think that the local community is actually where the solutions lie. It is not in a sort of big centralized place. The community here in Stillwater can address the needs of Stillwater. And so that's the last component that I wanted to, or the last sort of value proposition that I wanted to share. So why is this conversation around poverty important? I actually am a firm believer, now having been in government for 4 years and having some business understanding for 11 years prior, or actually closer to 20 years before that, is that the single greatest economic opportunity in our communities is to eliminate poverty. We can talk about bringing new business, we can talk about the big Google headquarters and all that, and there's power in that. But thinking about about lifting and helping 600,000 Oklahomans to lift out of poverty into being, to achieving the goals that they have for their family is economic development. And I would share with you, I believe it is the single greatest thing we can do as a country is to help families lift out of poverty. That is it helps with build a rising tide in our state. So again, I mentioned the editorial series. And what that does for me is, I think it was the third submission is the one I'm going to dig in deeper. So I've laid out a little bit of narrative that I request for a pause, created a little bit of core values to work together, but then I built a narrative about 2 years ago that was really helpful, I think, in illustrating sort of what poverty is for individual people. And that narrative is built on the game Chutes and Ladders. You all remember the game Chutes and Ladders from your childhood? So the game board is created with boxes that go up the game board, and in our lives, those boxes represent goals. So we're trying to get somewhere for our family. I have my own personal goals. My family has goals. My kids have goals. So we have our own game board. In some places, there are ladders that take us up multiple levels, and in life, that's represented by a promotion at work or a marriage or an educational attainment, something like that. And in some cases, there are chutes, and then some of those chutes take us all the way down to the bottom of the game board, and we have to start over. Those chutes in our lives can be things like a catastrophic health emergency, a death in the family, a divorce, a loss of a job, those sorts of things. It's important to share that most of those chutes are somewhat outside of our own control, right? A worldwide pandemic that creates massive unemployment is kind of outside of a lot of people's control. My wife, getting cancer is outside of our control, and sometimes that has a deep impact to our family, not just emotionally, but financially. I may have to take a step back to take care of the kids while she's going through treatment, or we have to exhaust our savings for that. So we all sort of teeter not all, but sometimes teeter on the edge of this chute that could take us all the way down to the bottom of the game board to start over. The safety net that exists today that DHS operates is a one-size-fits-all approach. It sits under the game board and it keeps us from physically dying. That is the purpose of the safety net, or that's the effect of the safety net. So if you fall to this level of despair to hit the bottom of the game board, the safety net comes in play and it provides all of the resources that you're eligible for. I mentioned a handful of those already. I actually believe the proper approach is to create a custom safety net that follows us wherever we go on that game board. So when something happens in my life, there's a poor diagnosis, I lose a job, the opportunity exists for us to make a strategic investment in somebody's life and in their family to keep them as close to space 43 as they can get, where they were, instead of forcing them to fall all the way down to space 3 to reach out to ask for help from government. So that's the approach that we're trying to build. Actually, across the country, I would share with you, and I shared this at the table, Oklahoma Human Services System is considered now the most efficient, effective, and innovative human services system in the country. And I can share examples of that in lots of different systems, but a lot of it is around moving upstream and addressing poverty early on. It's about thinking about a new way to deliver services where we're building a much more proximate approach. We're meeting people we serve where they are instead of forcing them to come into a county office and walk through the metal detectors and meet somebody across a piece of glass to ask for help for food benefits. So we can talk about that some more. But ultimately, when I think about building this custom safety net, I think about a foundation or a philosophical foundation around that custom safety net. And then I think about the practical, like how we actually deliver programs in a better way. And so the philosophical, this is a piece that I'm working on. You are actually the first group I've ever shared this with. But the philosophical foundation of this safety net, to me, has a few components. The first is we have to lead with love. This is an opportunity for us to show who we are as Americans, as Oklahomans, to meet somebody's basic needs for their family, to help feed them, to help them have a place to live, those sorts of resources. And the opportunity is, in leading with love, is to build trust with a family. There is no trust in our system, so subsequently people come for a transactional outcome. Okay, so what we really need is to move from transactions to relationships, and relationships requires trust. So if I'm in need and I come for help and you deliver those resources to me and help me feed my family, I'm more likely to come back for the next step in the pathway for my family to meet their goals. So the first was lead with love to provide basic resource needs. The second is to build trust through efficient, effective government. And then the third is to get people on pathways out of poverty. And those pathways are ultimately around education and work. Those are the two fundamental sort of goal-end pathways. We all know that work, purposeful, family-supportive work is the way out of poverty. But we also all know that there are people in our community who cannot engage in those pathways today. There are severe mental illness, and that's building in our communities every day. Substance use concerns and issues that you probably deal with in the people that work for you all or that engage in your community. We have to build contributing pathways to get people from where they are, wherever they are, onto a future pathway of education and work. That's the goal. And so we have to be pragmatic in knowing that we have to make investments in families earlier around basic resource needs, around health, mental health, substance use, and family preservation in order to get people on those long-term pathways out of poverty. So those are the philosophical foundation that I wanted to set. Lead with love, build trust, and get people on pathways out. How we do that is through a brand new delivery model for human services, and it's broader than just human services. The idea I've mentioned is building a more proximate delivery model. You all may have seen in DHS we closed 41 buildings, about 1 million square feet in the last few years. That's because those buildings are obsolete. That doesn't mean we don't need a presence in our communities. Actually, what's happened is when we closed a building, we went much deeper in the community. We took our workforce and embedded them in community partners. So now we're meeting people not in the county. Well, we do still have some county offices. And I keep saying we. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm sorry. But we're meeting people in their community, close to where they are, school-based social services, in hospitals, in homeless shelters, in law enforcement offices. That's where DHS should be. It shouldn't be behind a piece of glass in a county office that's imposing to come into. And honestly, when people come to that county office, it's likely on the worst day of their lives, the day that they ask for help. We should meet you earlier because we are embedded where you are. So when we closed 41 buildings, we went deeper in the community. The next step is we're closing more buildings, but we're creating smaller, more strategically located and intentionally designed spaces and actually opening 51 new locations, just much less expensive because they're much smaller. They're not dinosaur buildings like I refer to them. So we'll end up netting about 300,000 fewer square feet. And saving another couple of $1 million a year likely. And so the total savings was dramatic, something like $10 million a year in real estate savings, but service level improved dramatically. So that's an example of a new proximate delivery mechanism that's embedded workers in community partners, meeting people earlier. And then the last piece, which we could talk about for way too long, is technology. We absolutely have to modernize government technology. I can talk for an hour about the state of technology in government, not just Oklahoma. I know, so I served as chair of the American Public Human Services Association. It's all of my counterparts across the country. And so I have a particular insight into the nation's human services system. It all operates on COBOL. That's what we operate here. Green screen, no mouse. It's 55-year-old technology. It's unbelievable. I can tell you my belief as to why that's still the case. But that is the truth. So I mentioned our budget was $3 billion. Now it's $5 billion because of all the federal stimulus dollars. It's coming back down to $3 billion. But we serve all those people. A third of the state's population comes through DHS every year, and they're managed on COBOL. It's amazing to think about. So technology as a companion for a really committed and passionate workforce is critical. It's the only way we're going to go from sort of status quo that's been in case for decades to actually transforming our communities and eliminating poverty is through technology. So those are the things I wanted to share with you all. That's sort of the basis of the articles that I wrote for the Oklahoman. It is, in short, it is. I have lots of views on lots of things, but it is an absolute honor to have served my state as Secretary of Human Services and Director of DHS. I'm a completely different person than I was in 2019. The pandemic was a fire. I was actually with my friend and counterpart in Iowa yesterday. I'm helping the Department of Health and Human Services in Iowa. And I do a podcast, and so I was interviewing her for a podcast, and I just said to her, an untold story will be what happened in the conference rooms of state government agencies during the pandemic. It was a fire every single day, and you either bonded together like you've never bonded with anyone, or you fell apart. And fortunately, in Oklahoma, in the Department of Human Services, we bonded, and that agency is doing great work today. So with that, I will stop. I have no idea how long I talked, but if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah?
So who has a vision like you?
Good question. So the question was, who has a vision, sort of like I do, across the country? So we're in a moment in the Health and Human Services system today. I would tell you that there are probably a dozen leaders who are really forward-thinking. I can name those states off the top of my head. Iowa is for sure one of them. Oregon is one. You're going to Oregon. They've got a great leader. He's a good friend of mine. But the problem is that one of the bigger issues in government is the cycles, the election cycles. So you have a new governor every 4 to 8 years. It takes a year to find a person to get in the seat. Then it takes them a year to build a vision. Then they realize the bigger issue to me, and we have a fantastic legislator here. The biggest issue in government is procurement. It is not close. And it's all of government, all across the country. When we talk about technology, at DHS, we have designed probably 10 wireframes, the designs for new technology, and it takes about 3 years to build it all. It'll take 5 years to buy it, to procure it. So subsequently, when you have that cycle, at the end of it, you have a new governor with a new leader who has a new vision, and nothing gets done. And so that is the biggest issue. So I would tell you it's not a leadership and a vision issue. It's not a dollars issue. It is a bureaucracy of government issue. That's why I say government is broken, and we can't blame the people in our communities who are suffering and living with poverty or homelessness because they cannot navigate the systems. It is almost impossible to imagine navigating the systems that we've set up to help them.
I wanted to read the articles you referenced. I'll take that.
You could go to the Oklahoman. I also, I've been writing a fair number of articles, and so I created a little website too that I just sort of hold it all. It's secretarybrown.com. And so there's a blog there that I just sort of post everything. I've been doing it for a few years.
Did the pandemic accelerate some of the processes?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. While we would never want you heard us on speaker. While we would never want for another pandemic, I mean, it was rough. It did accelerate a lot of things that are important. The first is it accelerated technology adoption in government. So we had 6,000 employees, many of them who weren't necessarily technology driven. Now they are all on virtual meeting tools. I mean, they're working. Their productivity level is through the roof. I mentioned we deployed from $3 billion to $5 billion in budget from 2019 to today with the same workforce. So the productivity is through the roof. So definitely accelerated some things. We had some flexibilities in procurement during the pandemic. Those have gone away. And I don't point just to state. I mean, this is all federal issue too. When I talk about 5-year purchase process, it is not necessarily in the state, it is not necessarily in the federal government, but it's those two and the intersection between the two, because everything has to be approved through state process, then goes to 3 federal agencies for approval. If one word is changed, it starts over at the entire process. So that's why it takes so long to get everything done. Nobody really understands how that works because every state is different and the federal government interacts with every state in a different way. It is a mess. So short answer is yes, but we're kind of sort of retrenching back into some of the old ways.
So who's your successor, and are you talking?
Absolutely. So my successor, I brought into the not into the agency. I promoted Dr. Deborah Shropshire to Child Welfare Director a month after I started in 2019. She's a transformative leader. The governor took my recommendation to appoint her. He did all of his due diligence, so I mean he is incredibly thoughtful in that work, and so she was my recommendation. She is a great leader. So she went from Child Welfare Director, which is the most difficult job I think in the country or in each state, to being Agency Director for DHS. We talk all the time. In fact, we're having coffee next week again. So yes, all the time. So I'm a deep supporter of hers. I think she's going to do great work. Thank you for asking that. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned education and jobs as sort of the 2 primary ways we need to focus to get out of this. But it seems to me the 2 are connected, that if you don't have education, then the jobs problem is a lot worse. So you elaborate a little bit on that. I mean, I would think that a lot of people can't get the jobs they need or would like to have simply because they don't have the educational background.
That's a great question. So the years are blurring together, so I'll get the times off. But I went to a cabinet meeting in Camp Gruber a few years ago. It was actually pre-pandemic, so it must have been 2019. And we as a cabinet sat down and said, we have got to create a new approach for workforce, because workforce and jobs meant matching a person with a job. That's not workforce. I mean, that's a component of workforce. That's not the entire spectrum. So I created a series of committees that we refer to as One Workforce Oklahoma. So from a philosophical perspective, here's the way I look at workforce. There are the commerce sides of the world, and Brent Kissling has been here a few times, the former director of the Department of Commerce. The commerce sides of the world should be in a position to understand what the workforce should be, what the future economy of the state of Oklahoma should look like, diversified away from oil and gas towards whatever the goal is. And that's not my space, so I'll leave that to the commerce folks. But then when you work with those employers to understand what the economy should look like, then you have an understanding of what the workforce should be. We need 1,000 engineers, we need 2,000 welders, whatever we need. So then that gives us, as the rest of the system, to a target to shoot at. And there are 2 sort of lanes of government that should be building a funnel to those jobs that we need. The first is, of course, the education system. We need to grow the people to fill those jobs. That's K-12 education, that's early childhood work, that's K-12, that's career tech, it's higher ed, building those people, growing those people. The other lane is my system, the human services system, the 600,000 Oklahomans living in poverty. We need to build, again, I keep using the word pathways, but we need to build pathways for them to get from where they are, to get into that stream, to get into those jobs and positions. So it requires all of government working together to understand what the target and goals are and how to create those two funnels to build those jobs. I would tell you, I think one of the sort of untold stories is the government is actually working very well together right now. The agencies work much better than they ever have from my perspective. There's constant meetings with human services and the mental health system, for example. Those are systems that need to work together every single day, and they are. So I think the momentum is in the right direction, but it's just a big system. It's hard. I hope I answered your question. Back here. Sorry, back here.
Hi. So we're best friends. You don't know it yet.
Okay.
But I'm Rachel.
Okay.
This is Garrett.
I heard.
work
Nice
at
to meet you,
the,
Garrett. I was going to
Food
introduce
and
myself.
Resource Center here in Stillwater.
Okay.
So we believe everything you're saying.
Great.
That the connection with people, part of our mission is providing connections that enable lasting change.
That's right.
So we work really hard
Love
to meet
that.
people where they are, but also provide tons of educational opportunities, programming, resources. We've struck out a little bit with relationships with DHS, so maybe you
Really?
can help me. We'll
I can
talk
definitely
after.
help. Okay.
But like you said, I mean, there's a million doors.
Yeah.
And the chutes and ladder thing is great because it is. Some people are knocked down with no support system.
That's right.
But here's my problem.
Yeah.
I'm fundraising for every dollar that we spend. So if communities are the answer, how can we access some of the government funding that can promote this preventative measure? We serve anyone that walks in our door that needs groceries, but we get to serve them at 200% of the poverty level. So we could provide
You're the
such.
next
If
gap
I
up
could
above
get
SNAP,
three
yep.
more of Garrett, not that there is three more of him out here, but
Yeah.
we have the potential to really make a change in our area. And we have a very generous community. I look around, tons of you are donors. Fundraiser September 7th, tickets still available. But I mean, but these people are the same ones that are asked by Mission of Hope
Yeah,
and
sure.
Wings of Hope, and everybody needs funding.
That's right.
So as the Food and Resource Centers, connecting people, meeting them where they are, getting them through that time and trying to provide those educational scholarships and all those things because we're a trusted entity. Do you see that shifting to where it could be the potential to provide places like ours with more funding to provide more boots on the ground help for people
Absolutely.
instead of just fixing the problem afterwards?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So I'll start by saying I think the first step is what I refer to as organizational intimacy. The idea is building relationship between whether it's government and nonprofits, philanthropy and nonprofits, philanthropy and government, which I'm doing some work on, which has been super powerful. But the idea is aligning around the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. One of the bigger issues across the country is that we don't have a target. Like you have 50 states working towards 50 different things. And because the federal government has never created a set of outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So in the Farm Bill that's currently going through Congress, I've been advocating deeply for the creation of a National Outcomes Committee. So that is a group, the EU has one that's similar, it's called the Indicator Subgroup, but the idea is to create a series of outcomes that we want to achieve as a nation around poverty. So I think two outcomes, and I'll get to the rest of it, but I see two sets of outcomes in the SNAP program. One is, today we're measured on outputs. It's the timeliness to delivery of benefits, and it's the fraud prevention, which is all super important. Efficient, effective government is critically important. But real outcomes are lifting families out of multi-generational poverty. That's what we've got to do. So a series of outcomes around work and education, those pathways, other pathways as well, and through the development of what I refer to as family and career success plans. So no longer, we've got to modernize the concept of work requirements, and it's got to move towards family and career success plans with the goal of work and education at the end. So those are outcomes that we need to search for. The other is health outcomes in SNAP. It's the largest feeding program on the globe, and nutrition is not measured. That's the N in SNAP is nutrition, is not measured in any way in SNAP. So by aligning around outcomes, then that motivates government organizations like the Department of Human Services to look at who the partners are that can help them achieve the best outcomes. Right now, they're measured on, exactly right. So they're measured on timeliness to benefits delivery and quality control rates. You can't help us with that. We have to do that. That's government process that does that. That's exactly right. That's it, nor should you. That's not where your heart is. But if we were measured on real outcomes, not outputs, then we would come to you and say, you can help us do this. Like, let's do it together. And that comes with funding. There have been some areas at DHS over the last 4 years that have really partnered well with nonprofits. They're not really in the food program. The problem with food programs is the federal grants are very restrictive. You can only do certain things with them as an agency. So even if we're aligned today, there's no flexibility in how those dollars are delivered, so we can't really do a lot. But the other two areas I'm just going to illustrate where we've built some really good partnerships. One is in the early childhood space through a program called the Oklahoma Clearinghouse for Early Childhood Success, where we co-invest with philanthropy to build curriculum for child care centers around evidence-based programs, national and global best practices. And so we're building actual on-the-ground curriculum for training for the workforce in child care, but DHS funds some of it because we have some flexibility in the Child Care and Development Block Grant, and then philanthropy does the other part. And so that's a really great alignment. Philanthropy brings nonprofits too, by the way. And then the other is in TANF, which is the replacement for the welfare program, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, where we have deployed what we refer to as a TANF investment strategy. And so over the last 18 months, we've deployed about, I'm going to get the number slightly off, about $80 million to nonprofits who help with family stability and youth supports. Those are the two sort of topic areas of TANF. So those are millions of dollars for Boys and Girls Clubs. YMCAs have received millions of dollars across the state in dollars from TANF. But that came from a public-private committee of 17 of the largest foundations coming alongside DHS to find where we can co-invest in projects, which is transformative. Nobody in the country has done that. So anyways, what I'm doing is saying we're not there on the food stuff yet as a system because the restrictions around the SNAP program, but in other areas the state of Oklahoma is building culture to really invest alongside nonprofits and foundations. I know Chris had a question.
You got out of here in 2001, private sector for 18 years.
Yes.
What prepared you to create a whole new model in 3 years?
Okay, so again, we started with a prayer. This is a divine devotion or promotion for me. I can tell the whole story of how this came to be. It's way longer than you all probably want to hear. But I know this is the space that I needed to head to. For 11 years, I was CEO for a company that does senior housing. So we owned and operated assisted living and memory care communities in multiple states. So I connected professionally with the adult or aging services and adult protective services. Those are two divisions within DHS. From a personal perspective, I served nonprofits around kids for 15 years. So that's Big Brothers and Big Sisters, the zoo, I was on the corporate board for the Greater Oklahoma City YMCA, which is I think like 18 Ys now, including Stillwater. So I just have a personal passion. Children's Hospital at OU, even though I wear orange shoes, and but I just built a personal passion for kids. And so when I met with the governor, it was the alignment of my experience on the adult side of the world, and then my personal commitment for kids, and then what I very much believe to be a divine promotion. It is a very big job. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. It was great to be with you.